The organ you are using to watch this video is smaller than it should be.
Not because of disease, not because of injury, but because of something your ancestors started 10,000 years ago.
And the worst part? It is still shrinking right now as you watch this. The cause is not a screen, not a toxin, not a disease. It is something sitting in your kitchen right now.
Why is your brain slowly shrinking? The science might surprise you. It's called brain atrophy, and it affects everyone. Discover the causes and how to protect your mind. Right now, as you read this, your brain is smaller than your ancestors' brain was 10,000 years ago. Not slightly smaller, meaningfully smaller. The human brain has shrunk by about the size of a tennis ball since the peak of our evolution, and scientists have known about this for decades. But the reason why has been one of the most debated mysteries in all of human biology. Is it diet? Is it civilization? Is it because we stopped needing to be smart in the same ways our ancestors were? The answer turns out to be all three, and it starts with a number: 1,400 cubic centimeters. That is the average volume of a modern human brain today. But at our peak, roughly 30,000 years ago, the average human brain measured closer to 1,500 cubic centimeters. We have lost 100 cc of brain volume. That is not nothing.
To understand why, you have to understand what the brain actually is and what it costs to run one.
Your brain makes up only 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of all your energy every single day. Running a brain is extraordinarily expensive.
In the ancient world, that cost was worth it. Every calorie of brain power paid off. You needed to track animal migrations across hundreds of miles.
You needed to memorize the locations of hundreds of different plants, their seasons, their toxicity levels, which ones healed and which ones killed.
You needed to read weather patterns, predict seasonal changes, navigate without maps across completely unknown terrain.
And you needed to do all of this without any external tools. No books, no GPS, no Google. The only storage system available was the one inside your skull.
This is what anthropologists call the cognitive load of survival. And for most of human history, that load was enormous. Every waking hour demanded full mental capacity. Then something changed. Around 10,000 years ago, humans invented agriculture. And almost immediately, the brain started getting smaller.
This is not a coincidence. The timing is too precise. Agriculture and brain shrinkage began at exactly the same moment in history. The question is, why? The first answer is outsourcing. When humans started farming, they began outsourcing cognitive tasks to their environment for the very first time. A hunter-gatherer had to remember exactly where every food source was located. A farmer didn't. The food was right there, in rows, in the same place, every single year. The complex mental maps that hunter-gatherers maintained, tracking dozens of animal herds, hundreds of plant locations, river paths, seasonal patterns, simply became unnecessary. And the brain, being the ultimate efficiency machine, responded the only way it knows how. It pruned what it no longer needed.
Neuroscientists call this synaptic pruning. Your brain constantly eliminates neural connections that aren't being used. It's not stupidity, it's optimization.
But here is where it gets complicated. Because agriculture didn't just reduce cognitive demand, it also dramatically changed what humans ate. And that change hit the brain directly.
The hunter-gatherer diet was extraordinarily nutrient-dense. Organ meats, bone marrow, fatty fish, eggs, nuts, varied plants. Every one of these contains compounds the brain desperately needs to grow and maintain itself.
DHA, an omega-3 fatty acid found abundantly in fish and brain tissue, makes up 25% of the fat in your brain. It is literally a structural component of every single neuron you have. Hunter-gatherers were eating fish and organ meats constantly. Their DHA levels were consistently high. Their brains had all the raw materials needed to stay large and fully functional. Then farmers switched to grain: wheat, barley, millet, and grain contains almost no DHA, almost no omega-3s, almost none of the critical fats the brain needs to maintain itself. Without adequate DHA, the brain cannot replace damaged neurons at the same rate. It cannot build new connections as efficiently. It slowly, quietly begins to shrink. But diet alone still doesn't explain everything, because some farming populations ate fish regularly and still experienced brain shrinkage. Something else was happening. The third factor is the most controversial and the most fascinating. It is the possibility that civilization itself, the act of living together in large organized groups, made individual brains smaller. In a small hunter-gatherer band of 20 to 50 people, every single individual had to be competent at everything: hunting, foraging, navigation, tool-making, healing, negotiation.
There was no room for specialization, no room for dependence. If you didn't know how to do something, you died. Your brain had to hold an enormous range of skills simultaneously. But in an agricultural civilization of thousands, something completely new became possible: specialization. You didn't need to know everything anymore, you just needed to be very good at one thing.
The farmer didn't need to know how to make tools. The blacksmith didn't need to know how to grow food. The healer didn't need to know how to build houses. Each person's cognitive range narrowed dramatically, and the brain, ruthlessly efficient as always, responded. Why maintain the neural hardware for navigation if you never navigate? Why keep the circuits for plant identification if you never forage? Use it or lose it. This is not a motivational poster. It is literally how the brain allocates biological resources. Unused neural territory gets reassigned or eliminated entirely.
But there is a fourth factor that nobody talks about. One that is deeply uncomfortable. And it involves the relationship between brain size and social safety nets. In a hunter-gatherer band, natural selection was brutal and immediate. If you were significantly less intelligent than your peers, survival became nearly impossible.
In a large agricultural civilization, that brutal filter was softened. Communities could support members who struggled. Food could be shared. Weaker individuals could survive and reproduce in ways that were simply impossible before. This is not a moral argument. This is simply evolutionary mechanics. When the selection pressure for maximum cognitive ability relaxes, the average cognitive hardware in the population shifts downward over generations. Think of it like this. If every single person in a society had to run a marathon to eat, the average fitness level of that society would be extraordinarily high. Remove that requirement, and fitness levels drift downward. The brain followed the same pattern. Maximum cognitive ability was no longer a survival requirement, and so, over thousands of generations, the average brain volume quietly declined.
But wait, does smaller mean dumber? This is where the story takes a genuinely surprising turn, because the answer is almost certainly no.
Brain size and intelligence have a complicated relationship. Elephants and whales have much larger brains than humans, but they are not more intelligent. What matters is not the size of the brain, but the efficiency of its connections. And here is what the fossil record actually shows. As the brain shrank, the density of neural connections appears to have increased. The brain was becoming more efficient, not less capable. Think of it like a city, an ancient sprawling city covering hundreds of square miles with dirt roads between widely spaced buildings, versus a modern city, smaller footprint, but with highways, fiber optic cables, and skyscrapers.
The modern brain may process certain types of information faster and more efficiently than its larger ancestor. It just processes a narrower range of things.
But here is where the story becomes genuinely alarming, because the brain shrinkage that began 10,000 years ago has not stopped. It is continuing right now, possibly accelerating. GPS has begun replacing the brain's internal navigation systems. Studies show that people who regularly use GPS show measurable reductions in hippocampal activity, the brain region responsible for spatial navigation. Calculators replace mental arithmetic. Search engines are replacing memory. AI is beginning to replace reasoning. Every cognitive task we hand to a machine is a cognitive task our brain stops maintaining. This is not speculation. Neuroscientists have documented measurable changes in how modern brains process information compared to brains from just 50 years ago. The changes are small, but they are directional. So what does this mean? Are we getting dumber? The honest answer is, in some ways, yes. In other ways, no. And in yet other ways, we simply don't know yet. What we know is this: the human brain is not a fixed organ. It is not the same across time. It responds to the demands placed on it. Always has, always will. And right now, in 2024, we are placing less demand on our biological brains than at any point in human history. We are outsourcing memory, navigation, calculation, and increasingly, reasoning itself. The brain that carried our ancestors through 300,000 years of brutal survival is now mostly being used to scroll through social media and decide what to order for dinner.
But here is the genuinely hopeful part of this story, because the same mechanism that allowed the brain to shrink is also the mechanism that allows it to grow.
Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and rebuild itself in response to experience, means that cognitive demand can rebuild cognitive capacity. The brain grows toward its challenges. London taxi drivers who memorize the entire street map of London, over 25,000 streets, show measurably larger hippocampi than non-taxi drivers. The brain grew to meet the demand. Musicians who learn complex instruments show expanded auditory and motor cortices. Athletes who master complex movement patterns develop denser cerebellums. Chess players use their prefrontal cortex. Challenge the brain and it responds, which means the trajectory of human brain shrinkage is not inevitable. It is a response to how we live. Change how we live, change the demands we place on our brains, and the brain will change in return. Learn to navigate without GPS occasionally. Do mental arithmetic. Read long books that require sustained concentration. Learn a musical instrument. Acquire a physical skill. Give your brain problems it actually has to solve. The brain that shrunk because of agriculture, specialization, and outsourcing can be maintained and potentially expanded by the deliberate choice to keep challenging it. The brain shrinkage that began 10,000 years ago was not a choice. But what happens to your brain from this moment forward, that part is entirely up to you.
Your brain is 10,000 years into a quiet transformation. The question is whether you are going to be passive about it or deliberate.
Agriculture shrank it, specialization narrowed it, outsourcing hollowed it out, but neuroplasticity can rebuild it. The brain is not finished with you. The question is whether you are finished with it.
The brain is not finished with you. The question is whether you are finished with it.